Today is the 60th day of the Israel-Hamas war, and with the war now expanding from North Gaza to Southern Gaza, the United Nations has warned of an apocalyptic situation, saying there is simply no place safe to go for civilians. Remember, it was in the south where Gazans had sought refuge on the advice of Israel. UN's humanitarian agency has sent tens of thousands of internally displaced Palestinians have arrived in Gaza's southernmost governorate of Rafah over the past 2 days, and concerns are growing over the overcrowding and the spread of disease. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has said, given that shelters in Rafah city have exceeded their capacity by far, most newly arriving internally displaced people have settled in the streets and in empty spaces across the city where they erected tents and makeshift shelters. Martin Griffiths, the top UN emergency relief official, has said, every time we think things cannot get any more apocalyptic in Gaza, they do. People are being ordered to move again with little to survive on, forced to make one impossible choice after another. Such blatant disregard for basic humanity must stop. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has appealed to the Israeli Defense Forces to spare civilians from more suffering, noting that despite evacuation orders, there is nowhere safe to go in Gaza and little to survive on. Consider this. Almost 1.9 million people, that's more than 80% of Gaza's population, have now been displaced. Nearly 1.2 million internally displaced people are sheltering in 156 UNRWA facilities across the Gaza Strip. A large majority, almost 1 million people, are sheltering in facilities in central and south Gaza, in places including Khan Yunis and Rafah. The average number of people in UNRWA shelters is a little over 10,000. That's more than 4 times their capacity. The UNRWA director has said people are pleading for advice on where to find safety, and we have nothing to tell them. The UN agency has also said that 218 internally displaced people have been killed and more than 900 injured while sheltering at these UN facilities. The organization also said that 111 of its staff have been killed since the 7th of October. Israel has been intensifying its aerial bombardment of southern Gaza in pursuit of Hamas and declared that it would expand ground operations to the whole of the Gaza Strip. This as intense battles are still taking place in northern Gaza. A recent evacuation order to move civilians from Khan Yunis into Rafah in southern Gaza created panic, fear and anxiety, according to UNRWA chief Philippe Lazzarini. Scores of wounded people were seen being taken from rubble to hospitals. The World Health Organization has said Israeli military activity in southern Gaza could deprive thousands of Palestinians of health care, describing the conditions around Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis as catastrophic. Making matters worse, Gaza is in a near total blackout. The last remaining major telecommunications operator in the enclave, Paltel, has said all telecom services in the strip have been completely cut off. This means Palestinian civilians caught in the line of fire are unable to check on each other or call for help, and emergency and medical workers cannot coordinate their responses. UN Humanitarian Coordinator Lynn Hastings has said, if possible, an even more hellish scenario is about to unfold, one in which humanitarian operations may not be able to respond. The use of only the Rafah crossing to bring in aid trucks does not work, despite the efforts of UN agencies, Egyptian and Palestine Red Crescent Society. Hastings says Gaza's health system is on its knees with a lack of clean drinking water, no proper sanitation and poor nutrition for people, and shelters with no capacity. The situation amounts to a textbook formula for epidemics and a public health disaster, he says. More than 15,800 Palestinians have now been killed by Israeli attacks since the 7th of October, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces claim a ratio of 2 Palestinian civilians killed for every Hamas terrorist is tremendously positive, given the challenges of urban combat. There are also reports now that Israel has readied a plan to flood Gaza tunnels with seawater in order to target Hamas and drive out its fighters from the tunnels. A Wall Street Journal report says Israel has assembled a large system of pumps and completed the setup of at least 5 pumps north of the Al-Shati refugee camp. These pumps are capable of moving thousands of cubic meters of water per hour, likely flooding the tunnels within weeks. It's not clear, though, whether Israel will go ahead with this plan. The IDF hasn't commented on this yet.
This past weekend, I held several rounds of intensive phone calls with partners in Israel, Egypt, Qatar, and other nations as we remain intensely engaged in a basically non-stop discussion of the developments in the region since Hamas's devastating terrorist attacks on October 7th. We're still talking about trying to find a way forward on hostages. We're talking about sustaining and expanding the humanitarian assistance, making it into Gaza.
Too early to make a definitive assessment. The Secretary was very clear about how we want to judge this based on results, not based on intent. We've seen a much more targeted request for evacuations here, where the Israeli Defense Forces have identified specific neighborhoods where they plan to conduct military operations and urged in advance of those operations the people in those neighborhoods to move, rather than telling an entire city or an entire region to vacate their homes. So that is an improvement on what's happened before. We think far too many people. I have not seen evidence that they are intentionally killing civilians. We believe that far too many civilians have been killed. But again, this goes back to the underlying problem of this entire situation, which is that Hamas has embedded itself inside civilians, inside civilian homes, inside mosques, in schools, in churches.
The wounded and patients are on the floor. There is no life-saving health service in the hospitals of southern Gaza Strip. Hence, hospitals in southern Gaza Strip have totally collapsed. They cannot deal with the quantity and quality of injuries that arrive at the hospitals. It is difficult for the ambulances to reach the injured in the target areas. The Israeli occupation targets ambulances that move in the southern areas of Gaza Strip. It prevents them from reaching the target places. In this sense, we call on the Security Council, especially its permanent members, to carry out its legal responsibilities and work to end this barbaric war and force Israel to return to credible negotiations to achieve a just solution to the Palestinian issue. We are constantly working to renew it and ease the burden on our people in the Gaza Strip. But truces are not a substitute for a comprehensive ceasefire.
All right. Joining me on the show tonight is Dr. Alexander Greenberg of the IDF Military Intelligence Research Department. He joins us live from Israel. We also have with us Lev Aaron, Israeli columnist and journalist. And completing the panel tonight is Ambassador Suresh Goel, former Indian diplomat, joining us from New Delhi. Gentlemen, welcome back to Global Lens. Thanks very much for joining me. Lev Aaron, if I could start with you. Catastrophic, apocalyptic, these are just some of the words that are being used by agencies such as the United Nations to describe what is happening with the war spreading from northern Gaza to southern Gaza. Now, you've heard this before. It is Israel which for weeks together had advised Palestinians to leave the north and move to the south for their own safety. And now people on the ground, whether it's the residents of southern Gaza or UN agencies that are present there, say there is simply nowhere safe to go for the Palestinian civilians, because even the so-called safe zones are not safe. Israel may claim that it has earmarked certain areas for the civilians to go to, but even shelters have come under attack. There are maps being issued. Nobody seems to understand what's going on. There is utter confusion and chaos. There is a telecommunication blackout. So much so that UN agencies are saying people are desperately asking us, where do we go for our safety? And we have nothing to tell them. This is not a figment of anybody's imagination. These are people of southern Gaza who are living this nightmare, and these accounts have come from multiple UN agencies that are working on the ground. So I have a simple question. Where do Palestinians go now?
I'm honored to be here, first of all, and thank you for inviting me. The second thing is let's remember that I'm not an official spokesperson for Israel, okay? So I'm just voicing my own opinions.
Sure.
I think that Israel, as a liberal democracy, it is okay that the world, that you will ask us harsh questions, as you just asked me now. But we should also remember that when Palestinians are human shields of Hamas, it is in a way a bit unfair to ask Israel how come innocent people are getting killed, because they're not getting killed because there is some kind of a thirst among us, among Israelis, maybe some right-wing fringes, but most of us not, for some kind of Palestinian or Gazan blood. This is because they are human shields of Hamas. And I think there is also some kind of consensus among most pundits that I know that the solution is Gaza is only after Hamas is defeated. So I think if we overpressure Israel and if we over-criticize Israel and tell them how come these children were killed or these women were killed, we are not doing any good to the Palestinians, because at the end of the day, the only solution is the end of Hamas and then the build-up of Gaza. There is no other solution. And the reason that now everything goes so much slower than before is because we, as Israelis, we want to kill let's say we don't want to kill any innocent people, but if we have to kill some because they are human shields, we want to kill as few as possible. So I don't think that our motivation to kill only Hamas terrorists and not to kill even one Palestinian innocent person, I don't think in this sense anything has changed during the last week. And look, I agree that once they moved from Gaza to Han Yunis, and now they move from Han Yunis to the Egyptian border, okay? I understand that there is less and less place that you can feel safe as an innocent Palestinian. But on the other hand, we should also remember that during the Russian-Ukrainian war, Germany has digested 1 lakh Ukrainians, maybe more. Poland digested and accepted 1 lakh Ukrainians, also Syrians and so on. So in a way, one thing that we see is that on one hand, the world tells Israel there are so many innocent Gazans that you as Israel, you must protect them. On the other hand, we don't see, maybe Ireland was the first country. I think other countries have very little appetite to invite innocent Palestinians to their land until the end of the war. So this is also something that we should take into account.
All right, before I take this to Dr. Alexander Greenberg, I want you to respond, Lev, to what French President Emmanuel Macron has said, because I think he makes a very important point. He says, firstly, Israel must define its goals more clearly, because finishing off Hamas could take a decade of fighting. Then he goes on to say, make no mistake, there can be no lasting security for Israel in the region if its security comes at the cost of Palestinian lives and therefore the resentment of all public opinion in the region. Since you say we are doing this for the larger security interest of Israelis, because we want to make the people of Israel safe again, and we cannot coexist with Hamas, and we must finish off Hamas, I think the French president makes a very good point. Can Israel really hope to achieve lasting and durable peace and security if it comes at the cost of millions of Palestinian lives and creates so much resentment as it already has in the Arab world?
So I will make it shortly because we have Dr. Greenberg and there is a very good panel here, not only for me. I think what Macron said is part of his Desi constituency. I'm not sure that he said it as some kind of a macro politics. I don't think that we need a decade. We need less than 1 year.
Okay, but you've not responded to the second point. So let me put that question to Dr. Grinberg before I talk about the situation on the ground. Dr. Grinberg, of course, you can agree with the French president, and I know you will, but I want you to specifically respond to the argument that he's made. Apart from saying that Israel hasn't very clearly defined its military objectives and that this goal of finishing off Hamas could take a decade of fighting, that is something that Lev doesn't agree with. Macron says there can be no lasting security for Israel in the region if it comes at the cost of Palestinian lives and results in so much resentment that we've seen already building up in the region. Respond to that.
As Lev, I am not an official representative or anything. I'm not an intelligence officer anymore. And I don't think Israel is obligated to elaborate on its final goals to a French or Canadian or Zimbabwe president. Israel's government is responsible for Israel's people after its failure, terrific failure, of the intelligence establishment and the military establishment. And this is the only clear goal, to obtain a crushing victory over Hamas. That's all. That the French president doesn't like it, well, I cannot do anything serious on that matter.